I have a great white shark and a whale shark sitting behind me. Two things that represent what we're going to be talking about in the video today. Okay, so this is going to be my review of Finding Nemo, Pixar movies. Pixar Studios' Finding Nemo came out in 2003. And I love how just over the course of time that it went from, my light in the background is not quite right. It's supposed to be on orange. Are you going to stay or do I have to fix you again? Okay. We have orange light. There we go. One of the things that I do like about getting to watch with what I'm doing with my dad, it's like watching through all of the Disney Pixar movies in order for when they were released, is like you do get to see this progression and just like how much more complex each movie gets. Like with Toy Story, all the characters are toys for the most part. Yeah, there's humans there and there's some animals, but it's mostly toys. And then even from like Toy Story 1, Toy Story Into a Bug's Life, there is like an increased, complex, capability in there. And then, more and more and more. Like in the original Toy Story, is like, there's no water. There's not really any liquids in Toy Story. You get into Finding Nemo, the entire movie has water in it. And I love that. I will always forever find that to be amusing. I don't know why, but I do. So of course, Finding Nemo is of course the story of like the little fish that's of course separated from his father. And then, the father goes on the whole journey to find his son. And yes, Nemo is named after Captain Nemo, as in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which the movie version of that was, I believe, first adapted by Disney way back in like the 60s or the 60s or the 70s or something. It was like one of the big productions that they did for like a science fiction type fantasy type thing that Disney did. So let's get into the movie. So of course, the opening of the movie is, of course, we meet the two clownfish, Marlin and Coral, and have this nice little anemone that they live. They just moved into the anemone. They have their little clutch of eggs. It's like 400 some eggs. And, they're just, we can see that they are very much, in love and everything. And they're all happy and everything. And we can see that Marlin seems a bit more carefree at the time frame from where he is, of course, later on in the movie. And of course, we watch this whole entrance and we kind of get to see the characters, and like we get to see this beautiful reef under the water and everything with like all these fish in it and everything, and it's gorgeous fish and other ocean life in it. And they talk about let's name half the eggs Marlin Jr. and half the eggs Coral Jr. I like Nemo. Coral. I like Nemo. Okay, well, we can name one Nemo, but I would like most of them to be named Marlin Jr. I'm just going to go for this now. In actual clownfish schools, most of them are male, and one of them is female, and the female is usually the largest clownfish. And then when that female dies, the largest male clownfish then goes through the transition into a just a natural transition that happens within the species into being the new female, the new leader of the school. And then the next biggest male becomes like the beta male or the alpha male, or so, whatever variation you want to put that in with. So it's like Finding Nemo is not naturally accurate, same way that like Lion King is not naturally accurate, and several other Disney movies that involve animals are not 100% accurate to the way that, with nature they would be, going for. But what we see, of course, throughout, the beginning is, they're very much in love, and like we see them like joking with each other, and then they go out of the anemone and anemone. Okay, I'll try not to do that again. But like they go out and then they see this barracuda, because like everybody else is like hidden away on the reef, and like there's this barracuda that's out there, and it ends up, Coral dives to go and try to, protect the eggs, and the barracuda, goes after her. Marlin tries to stop it, and he gets, knocked into the anemone. And then when he wakes up, after getting, knocked out. 'Cause, clownfish live in anemones because they're resistant to the electric shock that the anemones give off. And that's why they're able to live there and such. So it's not as it's a good protection device because like the clownfish can live in there, and then the anemone is able to be because since the clownfish live in there, it stays very clean, and then the anemone is able to be able to survive that way as well. It's a symbiotic relationship between the two of them. And when Marlin wakes up, he goes out and he sees that coral is gone and all the eggs are gone except one, and he finds a little bitty egg with a little bitty scratch on the side. And he vows vows to protect it and calls it Nemo. Cut to so many, I mean, like in regards to like the actual definition of like how quickly clownfish grow, probably not that much longer, but in context of like these clownfish take longer to age than regular animals, than regular clownfish do. We cut up ahead and we Nemo is now like quote unquote school aged, probably the equivalency of like a 5-year-old. And Marlin has turned into this very cautious, very not suspicious, not, well, somewhat paranoid, but very, very overly cautious character from where he'd kind of been a bit more fun loving at the beginning of the movie. And we see this. We see why he's very protective of Nemo. Nemo is his only child that survived. He lost Coral. He lost all the other children. And Nemo has like this little, gimpy fin that they call his lucky fin, of course. And, Marlin, he tries to make sure that Nemo is not like ashamed of it, but, Marlin also uses it as a reason to like prevent Nemo from doing things. And like he tells Nemo over and over again, it's like, you can't do that, you can't do that. And like Nemo unfortunately takes that to heart for a while in the movie. And of course, Marlin and Nemo head out, and it's supposed to be Nemo's first day of school, and they get to where the part of the reef where like the school meets, where like all the all the little kid fish meet for class, and there's these other dads there with their kids. There's just another fish, there's a squid, and then there is a seahorse, and of course their children are all like obnoxious to a degree. One of them even specifically states it: "I'm obnoxious." Yes, you are, now go away. And so we see them and we see the dads and like, "Oh, you're a clownfish, tell us a joke." Marlin doesn't have a joke. Well, he has a joke, but he can't tell it correctly. And Mr. Ray shows up, and Mr. Ray is of course the teacher for the class, and he's a giant stingray and he's cool. I like Mr. Ray, he's fun. He shows up, and he is very, very like very scientific. Like I would not be surprised at all if he's supposed to be based off of like Bill Nye the Science Guy. That would not surprise me in the slightest. And that also would have been like fun to have like Bill Nye the Science Guy come in and voice him. But I from what I remember, that is not true. Because if it was, I would have known that already, I think. But of course, what they do is, all the fish head off. The ray goes off, and he has all of the fish like kind of right on top of him to head to, where they're going to be having class. And they mention, the other fathers mentioned to Marlin about, "Oh, I remember the first time my child went to the drop off." The drop off. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the way that reefs work, or the way that kind of the ocean works, of course, with, the ocean, there's lots of different levels within the ocean, different zones. Mr. Ray talks about them in the beginning of it when he's like singing his song and everything. There's different zones in the ocean, different levels where light can get down to, and then like where different areas way in the deep, 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 dark bottoms of the ocean where light cannot get to. Because it's just so far down, and there's so much like ocean and other things in between, the surface and the bottom, where it's just dark. And, you need to have like not even night vision, but just like much more extreme ways of like sensory. But when it comes to reefs are usually within like a couple, I wouldn't say a couple 100 feet, but like a couple dozen feet or so. Maybe a couple 10, 20, 30, 40, somewhere in that range of like feet below the surface. Some of them are very close to the surface, depending on like high tide and low tide. But the way that it goes is like they go, and then like there's the drop off, which is then where it just goes directly into like open, deep ocean. We basically get an explanation to that in the movie to a degree of, like, you can see that in the movie. And Marlin runs off after, swims off, not runs off, swims off after them. And, Nemo and the other three kids, three of the other kids have, like, snuck off, and, like, they're, like, right by the drop off, and they're like, oh, who can get closer to the boat that they see there that they keep, calling a butt. And, they're just, like, playing and, joking and, kind of like the one-upping each other of, like, oh, who can get closer to it and everything. And Marlin shows up and he, like, berates Nemo in regards to it. It's like, no, you can't do that. You were going to go out on the reef. You can't, go out there, and you can't do that. Like, he's just, like, over the top, like, basically, well, he's in Nemo's eyes, he's, of course, embarrassing him in front of these new kids that could be his friends. And B, it's again and again and again with the fact that it's like Nemo says, like, just because you're afraid of the ocean doesn't mean that I have to be. And of course, Mr. Ray tries to smooth things over, and that doesn't work. And of course, Nemo ends up swimming out. And he swims out to the boat, and he ends up, of course, touching the boat. Marlin doesn't want him to do that, of course. And then, Nemo, it's just act of defiance in regards to that. Nemo's trying to get his way back, and then this is, of course, where we have it's very hard to say specifically what would be the quote-unquote direct villain in this movie. And that's kind of where I put it with Pixar. Is like, Pixar doesn't always have a direct villain in the movies, particularly in later movies. Sometimes there's a more antagonistic character, and in this case, technically, yes, P. Sherman and the other human in there, and of course Darla later on, are kind of like the quote-unquote antagonists of the movie, and the fact that they're these obstacles that the characters have to get over, that, like, Nemo and, Marlin have to get past, or have to face against in order to get, reunited. So they're, to a degree, they're kind of the antagonist, but this is where we get kind of the more plot of the movie coming to play, where we have, the diver, grabs Nemo and then, goes back onto the boat. And of course, Marlin is trying to swim after the boat. And, he's just trying to, all the other fish, like, scattered and hid, which is what happens a lot of the times on reefs and everything. When they see humans, they will go and hide. And, so Marlin's, like, trying to swim after the boat, following, like, the trail of the boat in the water. And he's swimming and he's swimming and he's swimming. He ends up losing the trail. And, of course, he ends up then, trying to just, like, swim and, like, trying to find someone that can, like, tell him which way the boat went. And then we end up, of course, meeting Dory. Runs into this blue Tang fish called Dory. And she says, oh, yeah, I've seen the boat. And, like, she starts leading him toward the way of the boat. And then she, like, stops. And then she ends up, like, accusing him of, like, chasing her. And then he's just like, no. No, you were trying to tell me how to find the boat. A boat? I've seen a boat. And then, of course, where we get the whole thing of, like, oh, I have short-term memory problems. Marlin. Of course you do. And, what ends up happening is, of course, as we see, it's like they kind of end up getting, like, forced to have to work together. Marlin tries to leave her, but then, of course, they're literally come face to face with this giant shark. Bruce, which, yes, Bruce, the shark, the, great white shark in Finding Nemo is, of course, named after Bruce. That was the nickname of the shark, the animatronic shark that they used in Jaws. That Steven Spielberg made, of course, so I like that reference there. And, Bruce kind of just, like, invites / takes them to this get-together that he's having on this sucking submarine with these two other sharks, Anchor, who is a hammerhead, and a mako shark that is named Chum. And they basically reveal that this is, like, a shark's form of, like, an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. So it's like a Fish Eaters Anonymous meeting. And, of course, they have their whole, oath of, fish are friends, not food type moment. And, everybody knows that. And, so as we have that moment there, and of course the sharks are just like, oh, it's been like, my name's Bruce. It's been 3 weeks since I've had my last fish. And, Dory, ooh, my name's Dory, and I don't think I've ever eaten a fish. Like, first of all, I was going to say, well, you are a fish, but you're not the type of fish that eats other fish anyway. So that's the joke there, of course. And, we have this moment where Marlin ends up telling them, it's just like, I'm trying to find my son. And I've just been, he got taken by some humans and I need to find him. And he ends up seeing this diver's mask that, of course, had fallen off the boat. And he, sees it and he's like, oh, this mask was like the guy that took my son was wearing this mask. And it's just like, oh, well, the sharks end up like Dory grabs the mask and like Marlin, of course, overreacts and via things. Um, Dory unfortunately ends up getting hurt and fish blood enters the water. And of course, because sharks are attracted to fish blood, I mean, like Mythbusters has gone over this. It's just like human blood doesn't really do that much when it comes to sharks because it's not the type of chemical in the water mixture that they're used to having like activate their, senses in regards to hunting or going into a feeding frenzy. Although I guess the question that I do have is if Bruce hasn't been eating fish for the past 3 weeks, what has he been eating? I guess he could have gone vegetarian and like just been eating like, seaweed or things like that. I mean, like I don't know if sharks are necessarily built to eat that stuff, but I guess he could have also been like, eating birds and other seagulls and things like that too. I mean, it's not like they're impossible for a shark to catch. Moving on. But of course, what we see end up happening is, Bruce unfortunately kind of goes into the equivalency of a feeding frenzy. And he tries to, Chum and Anchor try to stop him, try to hold him off while Dory and Marlin are trying to escape with the mask. And via this escape, Dory ends up revealing that she knows how to read. And then Marlin tries to get her to read the mask, but of course they can't do that at the time. And via different things that happen, of course, with, having to deal with Bruce and everything, a torpedo from the sub gets launched. And then it ends up getting knocked into these giant, as revealed when they were making their way, giant, like, underwater mines that are all around the submarine. They're these, floating mines that are anchored to the bottom of the ocean. And of course, these were things that were used quite a bit in World War II, and possibly in even some areas today where just like they haven't been cleaned up yet because they're too dangerous to go and interact with. And like a bunch of these things end up getting, of course, setting off this huge, chain reaction of explosions, all over the place. And like the three sharks escape. And, Marlin and Dory, we do end up, of course, finding out later on that they're fine. But first we cut to where Nemo is. And Nemo has been taken into, he's thrown into this, he was thrown into a cooler with, in a bag with water in it. So he's, not like he's going to, I guess, suffocate because he's in water. I was going to say drown, but like the fish equivalent of drowning is like when you're like sitting in air for a long period of time. And what ends up happening is he ends up finding out that, he got put into a fish tank in a dentist's office. He has no idea what a dentist is, of course. And he ends up meeting these different fish that are there, that are in the tank. There's, of course, Bloat, who is a blowfish. There is Bubbles, who is a yellow tang, who's obsessed with bubbles. Bubbles, bubbles, my bubbles. There's Peach, who is a sea star that like sticks to the side of the tank most of the time. There is Gorge, Gurgle, whatever, who is a royal grandma, who is I think is the purple and yellow fish that's like a clean freak obsessed with cleaning. There is of course Jacques, who is of course the French accented plankton, cleaner shrimp, Pacific cleaner shrimp. And then there is Deb, who is the black-tailed humbug, who is this, the female fish that thinks she has a twin sister that is actually her reflection, and the reflection is named Flo. And then they end up getting introduced. Nemo gets introduced to them and everything. And, as they're watching, the dentist is like working, and then there's this, this pelican that comes in that's named Nigel. And I love how the scene is, it's just like all the fish are like watching the dentist work, and they're all just like critiquing like what he's been using, the technique he's using, what he's doing, this tool, this thing. And like, just like they know exactly what he's doing. And like, I love the fact that like a lot of them can read, because like Peach can read, the starfish can read. And like, we see her reading multiple things throughout the course of the movie, of course. But, we get like these other moments where, it's just like they're all just like critiquing the way that the dentist works. And I find that hilarious. And then like Nigel shows up, who's the pelican. It's just like, also just like obsessed with watching The Dentist, which is just funny in my opinion. And of course, like Nemo is just there watching this and he has no idea what's going on. And then they end up getting it's revealed that Nemo is going to be a birthday gift for the dentist's niece, Darla. And, we see this picture of Darla. And now, I think I've mentioned on the channel before in some other videos or in at least some other video, I have had fish. I had a goldfish that I won from like the state or the county fair, whatever, a long time ago. I wouldn't say 20 years ago, but it was a while ago. And it's like you win it from like you toss the ring onto the thing or whatever and you get the goldfish. And like I won that, and then like the goldfish went and lived with my sister for a while, and then eventually when my mom and I got like a tank set up in the apartment, we then got the fish for my sister, along with I think we got like a betta fish from my sister too, or like some other fish that was like a pretty fish. We got that from my sister too. And you know when you're a kid, you don't quite know exactly how long, goldfish and stuff like that are supposed to live. I'm like in ideal environments and everything like that, there's a difference. And of course, captivity versus wild, can be taken into account. But when you're a kid, you don't know these things. And like I had the fish and like I probably like, named the goldfish Goldie or whatever I nicknamed it. And like by the time I got it back from my sister, it had grown a fair amount. So it had been like well taken care of and well fed. But eventually the fish did die. But, it's just like, I think I knew enough as a kid not to, clearly Darla never learned this lesson at that point of don't shake the bag. Don't shake the bag that has the fish in it or the small animal in it, because that's not good for it. Because we see in the picture, of course, that the gift she got last year, that fish is very dead. And, so it's just like, it's like I look at the dentist and I'm just like, well, clearly you like fish and clearly you like reef diving and everything like that. Why in the world would you frame this picture of your niece holding a dead fish in this fish that you gave her that is clearly dead in the picture? Did you not notice that the fish was dead? Did you not notice, that maybe your niece shouldn't be given this type of pet for a while? Until she can, learn to control herself better. But like, eventually both of the fish died and, we had to, flush them or get rid of them. Well, one of them was too big to flush, but yeah, both of them didn't end up dying, but back to this. And like, we meet this other fish whose name is Gil. He's an old, Moorish idol. So he's a different type of, he's just some other type of fish that I believe, because like all of the fish mentioned that like they came from different pet shops or eBay or something like that. And then Nemo is mentioned to be from the ocean. He says he's from the ocean. And all of the other fish are just like, oh, well, we are trying to work on this like escape plan so we can escape to the ocean. Because like, as Gil says, being in tanks isn't good for fish. Now, I can assume that when it comes to to a degree, I can agree with that. That some animals are not built to be in that small of an enclosed space. I know with finding Dory, we go into more of the abstract things, just like, well, in an aquarium is different. But like in a fish tank, much smaller area is probably not the best place. But that's why I don't ever intend on having fish again myself. Other animals would be different, but I don't really intend on having fish at any given time again. But of course, so they're working on devising this escape plan, and like that night is when they like quote unquote initiate. They're planning on initiating, Nemo into their into their ranks. But of course, we cut to where, Marlin and Dory are, and they're awake, waking up after the explosions. And like they have the mask, and they end up like trying to figure out, it's like, oh, well, Dory can read, so we need to get her to read the thing. And they end up, being in the very deep, dark part of the ocean where they can't really see anything. And then, of course, there's, the pretty light that shows up. And then, of course, that light is, of course, revealed to be a anglerfish. Yeah, anglerfish are kind of scary looking things. um, I mean, like Lantern from Pokemon is based off of them, but Lantern is much cuter than this thing is by a long shot. Also, I got a shiny Lantern recently in Pokemon Go, so that was nice. Um, but what, of course, we see happen is like, well, Dory is trying to, read the mask, what's written on the tag on the mask. Marlin is being chased around by the angler fish, and it's, P. Sherman, 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney is, where they're trying to figure out all that it says and everything like that. So that's fun. And of course, Dory is able to figure that out, and they end up then, getting away, and she is just very surprised and ecstatic that she can remember it. Because that's like one of the things she's always had, just like anything in general is very hard for her to, remember. And in this case, she remembers P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney, which, a lot of kids that grew up with Finding Nemo kind of remember that address. She's like, one of those things that stick in your brain. And of course, that night, the tank gang then, kind of initiate Nemo into their ranks by making him, swim through this like ring of bubbles that pop up out of the tiny volcano that is in their tank that they call Mount Wanahakalugi. And that he's initiated it, and his new name is Sharkbait. Is his nickname. Sharkbait. I love Finding Nemo. I'm sorry. The majority of the Pixar movies I love, and even the ones that are not like oh my god, I love watching these every time I watch them, I still find joy in them. That's mainly like Cars 2 is mainly the extent of that list. But there's a couple that are just like they're lower on my rankings than other Pixar movies. But of course, what we see end up happening is, Gil then explains to them his plan. And his plan is to have them have Nemo like go into the filter and then wedge one of these little tiny, the pebble rocks from the bottom of the tank, wedge that into, the filter. And then that means that the filter will then stop working, and then Nemo will, come back into the tank through the cleaning pipe, and because he's small enough that he can fit. And, then once he's back in the tank, then, the tank will get so dirty and everything that what will end up happening is the dentist will then have to clean it. And then he'll have to put them all in little bags. And then once they're all in bags, then they can roll out the open window and then roll across the street and then roll into the ocean. Because, the dentist's, office is like right across the street. Right there is the ocean. So it's like, well, if we can get into the ocean, then we'll be good. Yeah. And of course, that's their whole plan. I mean, like, it's a decent plan. I'll give them that. And then, of course, we cut back to Dory and Marlin, and, they're, swimming around. Dory's, continuing, to repeat the P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney, and everything. And Marlin ends up saying something that ends up, upsetting, Dory, and then they end up getting interacting with this school of moonfish that all like, put themselves into different shapes and everything. And, when I'm looking at that, I'm like, I also just picture, Wishy-Washy from Pokemon. What can I say? There's a lot of things that Pokemon are based off of, and there's a lot of things that Pokemon are not based off of. Like, we haven't had an actual tiger Pokemon for a very long time. We haven't had a tiger Pokemon since Raikou, and I would very much like a tiger Pokemon that's not a legendary. But of course, what we see is, the moonfish end up, trying to, cheer Dory up and everything, and like they kind of are like being mean to Marlin, and like, they keep putting themselves in like different shapes and everything, which is just fun. And Dory keeps getting Nemo's name wrong, which is just funny. She calls him Bingo, Fabio, all these other names and everything that are not his actual name. And what ends up happening is, the moonfish tell her, oh, you need to get to Sydney. So you need to get onto the East Australian Current, and then that will take you to Sydney. Just like, oh, well, that'll be easy. We just need to, follow these directions. It's just like, it goes that way, and then you get in the Australian Current, and then it's like, it should drop you off there pretty quickly. Okay, then that'll work. And like, Marlin heads off, and like Dory follows him. Like, the moonfish warn Dory, just like, when you come to this trench, go through the trench, not over it. And of course, when they get to the trench, they end up going over it and not through it. And, this is, of course, when they run into the jellyfish. And they end up, having to, go through the jellyfish, which I haven't had huge interactions with jellyfish. When I was a kid and we went to Florida, my sister ended up getting stung by a jellyfish, but it was on the beach, so I don't know. It's just like, because I'd been near the jellyfish, but I don't think I touched it, so I don't know if my sister decided to touch it or what. I'm like, you're the older one of us. Why did you get stung by it? In this logical situation, I should have been the one that got stung by the jellyfish. But I didn't, but she did. It was admittedly on the beach, but moving away. And the other interactions I've had with jellyfish are at our aquarium in Omaha, where they've had like these huge tanks of jellyfish and like lots of different types of jellyfish. I don't know if they're exact kind that are here, but I know that one of the most poisonous animals on the planet are the box jellyfish, and that in Australia, if ever there are any sightings of box jellyfish, like beaches will get like not necessarily closed down, but it's handled very carefully because of course they're poisonous enough that if like a human gets stung by them, it's like you don't have very long before that poison kills you, type of a thing. And of course, Marlin is of course, but in this case, the way that they have it set up is the jellyfish just more use like electric shocks as opposed to poison. So there's a bit of a difference there. Which I mean, there might be some jellyfish that more use electric shocks than poison, but the majority of jellyfish tend to use poison, from what I remember. And of course, like Marlin ends up escaping, but then he has to go back into the jellyfish to get Dory, and he saves Dory, and then he just kind of like blacks out. Yeah, he blacks out. And of course, then we cut back to where Nemo is with the Tang gang, and of course, Nemo and Gil are working on getting their plan ready, and Nemo goes through the whole thing of getting the filter turned, trying to turn the filter off, but unfortunately during that time frame is when something goes wrong. When Nemo is trying to get out, the rock gets dislodged, so he's not, he's going to get sucked back in. So the other fish, they like grab a piece of one of the fake, leaves things there and like shove it up into the thing. And of course they save Nemo. And, they're just like, no, Gil, we're not, you can't do that anymore. No more escape attempts. And like Gil is even like to the point where it's in his mind, Gil is like, he's kind of okay with like risking his own life, but Nemo is this child, this kid that is missing his father and wants to go home, yes, but he's also a child. And Gil isn't going to risk Nemo again. And he says that they're done. He's not going to do that again. But Nemo and Gil had this conversation where like Nemo like looks at Gil's scars because Gil had made the comment about like having a bad fin had never stopped him before. And, Nemo sees these scars that are on the side of Gil's body and destroyed one of his fins. And he explains that one of the first times he tried to escape, he landed on dentist tools and probably got, cut up a bit before he got, put back in the tank. And, because dentist tools can be rather sharp. Actually, the week that I'm recording this, I have to go to the dentist later this week, so that'll be fun. My dentist does not have a fish tank. My dentist has pictures of horses. So big difference. And what we end up seeing is, of course, Gil is just like, no, I'm not gonna risk Nemo's life again, type of a thing. So it's, so we see that it's just like, Gil is like, him putting himself in danger is one thing, but he's not going to end up putting like Marlin or putting Nemo in danger again, type of a thing. He's not going to risk that. And then we cut back to where Marlin is, and he ends up waking up on top of this shell of a sea turtle, who introduces himself as name's Crush. I love Crush. He's fun. I think I have a Carcosa in one of my Pokemon games that I nicknamed Crush because I like Crush. And what we see end up happening is, Marlin says, was like, well, I have to get onto the East Australian current. Dude, you're already there. Like, there's like tons of sea turtles that are, swimming through the current and everything, rushing with the current and everything. And, Crush ends up, introducing himself and his son Squirt. And, and then of course Marlin sees Dory and he finds out that Dory is okay. And Marlin ends up then, telling Dory and all of these little sea turtles his story about, like, when he was trying to save Nemo, going after Nemo, and then the sharks, and then the explosions, and like jellyfish, like all this other stuff. And like, it's just kind of like, it's like this fish tale that keeps getting told again and again and again. And it's, it's just like, oh, like one of the, like the sea turtles tell these other fish, and then these other fish tell these other fish, and then it gets, spread and spread and spread until it gets all the way back to Nigel. And Nigel is, of course, the friend, the pelican that is the friend of the Tank gang. And he ends up hearing, like one of the other pelicans, like talking about Nemo. And he's like, whoa, 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 what do you mean? What did you say about Nemo? And he ends up, getting told the story. And then, like, he flies back to where, the dentist's office, and he's telling the Tank gang about this, just like, oh, there's this, there's your father, he's been traveling the seas trying to find you. And Nemo's like, well, that's not my dad. He wouldn't do that. And he's just like, oh, what was his name? Marlin? Yeah, Marlin, that was his name. And like, Nemo's just like, my dad fought off a shark? And Nigel goes, I heard there were 3. It's like, I love Nigel. He's fun. And, it's just like, so Nemo's like hearing these stories about what his dad's been doing to try to get to him. And then this thus encourages Nemo to then grab one of the pebbles, dive into the filter tank, and actually set the filter tank up so it will actually, not work. Like, actually, turns it off so the tank will continue to get dirty and disgusting and everything. So it has to be cleaned. And, so we see that, and of course they're just like, all the rest of them are just like, oh my god, you did great. They're just so proud of Nemo at that point in time. And we cut back to where Marlin and Dory are, and they're still like kind of traveling with the sea turtles with Crush and Squirt and everything. And they're getting ready to depart out of the East Australian current. And like, Nemo or Marlin kind of has this, very interesting talk with Crush, because he says, well, how do you know when your kids are ready? And Crush just kind of gives this, very vague surfer type answer of, well, when they know, And Marlin is just like, what? Type of thing. And it's just very interesting watching that whole thing happen, because it's very much, Marlin and Crush have very different parenting styles. And Marlin is kind of learning from Crush in regards to like watching how Crush interacts with, Squirt. And he explains, it's like, we lay their eggs on the beach, and then, sometime later they find their way back into the ocean, and then they find us and everything, and it's just like, it's instinct and everything. And then Marlin and Nemo, of course, or Marlin and Dory have to then exit out of the East Australian current, and like right before everybody's right before all the sea turtles are like out of earshot or whatever, too far away, Marlin says, hey Crush, how old are you? I'm 150 and still young. 150 I have to remember that, because I love at the beginning of the movie Marlin makes this joke to Nemo about like, after, if I find a sea turtle, I'll ask him how old he is after I've talked to the shark, and just like all this other stuff. And like, I love that joke that it's just like, well, that's gonna happen. And so Marlin and Dory got out of there, and like now they have to like make their way the rest of the way to Sydney. And during this time frame is, of course, when they get lost from like roaming around in like this cloud of particulate that's in the water, and they end up seeing this other fish, and Dory and Marlin figure out that, oh, that's a whale. And Dory, of course, ends up doing her talking like a whale, which I'm not going to attempt that. Talks like a whale, and the whale ends up then like coming and like, swallowing them. And, you know, I mean, like, out of these two types of sharks over here, the one I would like to deal with, would prefer to deal with, would be the whale shark, because they don't eat humans. They eat krill and like small fish, same way that like whale shark, that like actual whales are. You know, that way that blue whales and different types of, you know, other, you know, whales tend to be. They are filter feeders. These, you know, great white sharks will, you know, no, they won't necessarily try to eat me because I'm a human. It's if I'm in their territory, you know, I kind of put myself there, you know, just go watch Shark Week. You put yourself there, you're kind of risking yourself as is. Yeah. Um, you know, so there's that. But of course, what ends up happening is we cut back to the tank gang, and like, you know, the tank is getting completely disgusting and everything. And, you know, Nemo ends up, you know, he's just like really hoping that his father is out there waiting for him and everything. And, you know, the dentist says that, you know, he has to clean the tank before Darla gets there. And then we cut back to the whale's mouth, which of course where Dory and Marlin are. And Marlin is like keeps ramming himself against like the whale's the baleen of the whale's teeth. Keep like, you know, their filter teeth that they have. Keeps ramming himself into those trying to get out. And Dory and Marlin end up having this very, very important conversation where, you know, the whale actually kind of ends up like telling him, just like go to the back of my throat and everything, and the only thing that he's gonna help like get them out. But, you know, Dory and Marlin are just it's a very important moment that happens, of course, because it's finally Dory assures him that everything is going to be fine, but you just have to trust me and what's going to happen with this whale. And Marlin does, and it takes you like it's literally like a leap of faith that he has to take. And he does take it, and they end up getting, you know, shot out of the blowhole of the whale and end up getting dropped into Sydney Harbor, of course. And then the whale heads off after they say thank you. And then Marlin and Dory are, of course, you know, then they have to make their way to, you know, P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney. And, you know, they end up heading that way. And, you know, during that, you know, the next morning, when the animals wake up, when the tanking wakes up, they're horrified because the tank is clean, and now there's this really, really advanced like tank cleaner in the tank at that time. And, you know, that's not good, because it's just like that means that the dentist came in and like cleaned it while they were asleep and nobody woke up. And, you know, so they're just like, okay, so we have to figure out how to deal with this. And what ends up happening is, you know, when the dentist tries to, you know, take Nemo out with like, you know, the little, you know, filter net that they have, you know, all the fish jump in that and like they swim down and like they take the net away from him, and then like he still grabs Nemo and puts him in the bag for Darla and sets him on the counter in a little dish so he can't roll away. And what ends up happening is, of course, you know, when Darla shows up, she's very much, you know, they do the creepy, ominous dun 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 type of a thing when it comes to her. And, you know, you can just I was just like, now that I'm older, it's just like, I'm not gonna be like tapping on fish tanks the way that like they show that, because it's just like when you're a kid you don't try to catch that. That's maybe not the best idea to like tap on the fish tank right by the fish. So I would hope that, you know, now that I'm older, and I would hope that, you know, when I was a kid I got a little bit better at not doing that. But of course, what ends up happening is during this time frame is when, you know, Darla is, you know, you know, Darla's in there for her appointment and everything, and, you know, that's not doing too good, because, you know, then she'll get Nemo given to her. We cut out to the harbor where Dory and Marlin are, and they actually end up getting scooped up by a pelican. And then of course Marlin is just like, I came all this way, I'm not going out this way. And he, like, you know, they end up getting lodged in the pelican's throat, and like the pelican is just, you know, all that stuff. And what ends up happening is, you know, the other pelicans see this, and Nigel is the one that actually ends up going down and interacting with him and like knocking Dory and Marlin out of his mouth. And then he sees Dory and Marlin, and they say, you know, he said, you know, Marlin says something about, well, I have to get to Nemo. And then that's when Nigel realizes, you're the clownfish, you're Nemo's dad, you're Marlin and everything. And what ends up happening is, this is when all of the seagulls show up. And it's the mine, 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 that whole thing that happens. And what we see is, of course, Nigel ends up having to like prove to like Dory and Marlin that he knows where Nemo is. And he like describes Nemo as like he's orange and yellow and he has a little gimpy fin, and they end up kind of getting attacked by the seagulls, but Nigel saves them and scoops them up and scoops up water, and then he flies them to the dentist office. And during this time frame is, of course, when Darla is finally in the office, and what ends up happening is, Nemo actually plays dead inside of the bag. So he goes, belly up, so he looks like he's dead. And to like trick the dentist, because, Gil said, all drains lead to the ocean, which by technicality to a degree in certain areas is true, but not all the time. And what ends up happening is, instead of getting flushed, Nemo is going to get like dropped into the trash can, which is not the preferred answer. And what ends up happening is, that's when, Nigel, bursts through the window with, Marlin and Dory in his beak, and Marlin sees Nemo in the bag looking belly up. So of course he thinks that Nemo's dead, and Dory thinks that Nemo is dead, and so does Nigel at the time. And, P. Sherman, the dentist is then like, pushing Nigel out of the window and everything. And during this time frame, Nemo kind of woke up, and Darla grabs the bag and she starts shaking it and everything. And Gil and the other fish, like Gil hops on the Mount Wanahakalugi, and they like, make it go ring of fire and like shoot Gil out, and he lands on Darla's head, and she screams and drops Nemo's bag, and it gets, popped and splashed all over the dentist equipment. So Nemo's out of the bag, and then Gil is like flopping around on Darla's head, which is just funny. And then Gil ends up landing on the tray, and he's like, tell your dad, tell your dad that I said hi. And he like, Nemo landed, so he's like partially on one of the equipments, and it's set up like a teeter-totter, and Gil like flat, bangs on one of the equipments, and it like, or the little tools, and it like knocks Nemo into the spit sink that knocks him down into that, so he gets like flush drained down that. And then Darla ends up like shaking that and then getting like water sprayed in her face, which is which is just funny. And so we get that funny bit, and then we get the moment where Nemo travels through the pipes and ends up getting sent out into the water and everything. And during this time frame, Nigel had dropped Dory and Marlin off into the water and said that he's sorry and everything. And then Marlin and Dory have this moment where Marlin is basically saying to her, I know that you don't want to forget all of this, but I do. And it's like you can see where Marlin is coming from. So it's like you see, Marlin thinks that his son is dead, and Dory is she's doing the whole thing of, it's like, when I'm with you, I'm home. And if you leave, then I won't have that anymore. And I remember stuff better with you. And it's, this great moment where it's just like, you see it from both sides with both of the characters, with both Dory and Marlin, with the way that this journey has gone. With Dory, she found someone that will listen to her and will help her remember things better. And with Marlin, he went on this whole journey, and he was getting, literally coming out of his shell, go with this, joke about that. And he's coming out of his shell, and he's, finding more fun in life and everything. And then at this moment, he thinks that his son is dead. He came all of this way, and he was so close. And he failed. He feels that he failed. And he then, he just like, I don't want to remember any of this. I'm just going to go home, and I'm just going to try to forget everything that happened. And he swims off, leaving Dory alone. And during this time frame, Nemo gets, shot out of the, the water treatment pipes, and ends up, running into Dory. And he's like, well, she's like confused and everything. And, Nemo's like, well, maybe I can help you find who you're looking for, and you can help me find who I'm looking for. By the way, my name's Nemo. Oh, Nemo, that's a nice name. And she, follows him. And then Dory, of course, sees, Sydney written on something, and she reads it. And then that is the moment where Dory has everything, all the memories with meeting Marlin, and with, going on this journey, and P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney, and just like all of this stuff, comes back, and she remembers exactly who Nemo is. She's like, oh my God, you're Nemo. I found you. We need to find your dad. You're not dead. We have to find your dad. And I love what happens, because like they end up finding these crabs that like they refuse to tell them where Marlin went, and Dory just literally takes one of the crabs and like holds it above the water right in front of the birds. And like the crab's like, I'll talk. And like, Nemo and Dory, of course, swimming off trying to get to Marlin. And, what ends up happening is, Marlin, hears Nemo calling dad, and Marlin turns and he sees Nemo and Dory, and like Nemo and Marlin are, of course, fully reunited at that moment. And then, unfortunately, there's this giant, fishing net that comes through and grabs a bunch of fish, including Dory. And Nemo ends up jumping into the net. And he tells his dad that he's just like, I can do this, and we have to save Dory. So he tells his dad, tell all of the fish to swim down. And, Nemo swims through, and like he's telling all the fish, swim down. And, Marlin is telling all the fish the same thing. And this is, of course, Dory, as they're all swimming down, because it's, this, compacting force of pressure of all of these fish swimming down, pushing on this net, pushing the net and pushing, the rigging that it's on to its limits, that the rigging snaps. And of course, all the fish are then able to escape, because the rope, the net loses its tension, so the fish are all able to escape. And of course, Dory is doing her just keep swimming, that she, of course, did earlier on in the movie. And what ends up happening is, of course, all the fish are freed and Dory's fine. Like they see Nemo lying there, and like for a moment, Marlin still thinks that like Nemo got hurt again, or that Nemo's, dead again. Oh God, Marlin should have had a heart attack by now, but he didn't, thankfully. And he's like looking at Nemo, and like he ends up, he tells Nemo he's sorry for the way that he'd been acting and everything. And then he, when Nemo kind of wakes up, Marlin starts telling him something else. It's like, I met a sea turtle and he was 150 years old, and like, starts telling Nemo like the story of like how, the journey that he's been on. And then of course we cut ahead a little bit to where we see, we cut ahead to where, it's now time for Nemo to go to school again. And like, Marlin is like much happier with taking Nemo to school. And, Marlin is much more laid back. I mean, he's still cautious to a degree, but he's not anywhere near where he was at the beginning of the movie, with as cautious and scared of everything that moves. And he, takes Nemo to, class, and, he's much better at that. And, Dory's there, and like the three sharks are there, like they're sending, they're dropping Dory off from the meeting, and like Marlin is like the only one that's not scared of like the sharks that are now in the reef, and like they head off, and so which we get that fun thing, and like Crush or Squirt is like a transfer student from the East Australian Current there to see them, and that's just adorable. And Dory is now part of Marlin and Nemo's life now, and it's adorable. And of course, before Nemo heads off for class, him and he runs over, or well, he swims over, like him and his dad hug as best as fish can hug. And so he heads off, and they're all just Marlin is much more prepared, much better now at being a parent. And then of course, back in the dentist office, the dentist is frustrated, of course, because like the Aqua Scum 3000 or whatever it's called is broken, and it's not supposed to break, and he had to take the fish out of the tank, and then the fish rolled out, and then they all end up landing in the water. And then of course it's just like they're all in the bags, and it's just like, now what? Like, well, now you wait for Nigel to show up, and then he can pop you out of the bags. That's what you do. And I guess there is like a post-credit scene where like the little tiny fish that had been like Chum's friend at the meeting ends up, getting attacked by the angler fish. So that's just sad. But yeah, moving on. Okay, so cast. We have Alexander Gould as Nemo. We have Albert Brooks as Marlin. We have Ellen DeGeneres as Dory. We have Willem Dafoe as Gil, aka Green Goblin. Yeah. We have Brad Garrett as Bloat. We have Allison Janney as Peach. I didn't notice that. Austin Pendleton as Gurgle, I think he's supposed to be the bluish or the purple yellow fish. Stephen Root as Bubbles. Vicki Lewis as Deb / Flo. John Ramth as Jacques. Gregory Rush is Nigel. Gregory Rush is also better known as Barbossa from the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. John Ratzenberger is the leader of the Moonfish Troupe because he's in every Pixar movie. Andrew Stanton is Crush, and I believe Andrew Stanton was the director of the movie, I think. He was one of the production staff. Bob Peterson is Mr. Ray, and then Barry Humphries was Bruce. So there's not too much there. I already mentioned in regards to the fact that the way that clownfish actually work in the wild. As far as I'm aware, there is not really that much like Disney stuff for, you know, Finding Nemo outside of it, besides like stuff at the rides. You know, there's like some Nemo rides or, you know, based rides at some of the Disney parks, but there's not really that much. And then when it comes to like, there's not really any Kingdom Hearts stuff or anything like that. And Finding Nemo came out like after things were like after, you know, making, you know, House of Mouse was finished. So there wasn't any House of Mouse stuff that was in like Pixar. Well, there's no, not really. Donald dresses up as like Flick from A Bug's Life, but that's about it. But there's not really any other interactions there. There's not as much crossover stuff that happens there, unfortunately, because they're not in Kingdom Hearts or anything like that. So that's what I have. I thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you have a nice rest of your day. Bye. 71% of the Earth's surface is covered by water. That's a big place to find one fish.